Hello, everyone. So happy for you all to join us today. I'm Tracey Meyers. I'm one of the core faculty here at Studio B. Welcome to our webinar series, Meet Your Center, where we explore topics that provoke the expansion of human capacities, both personally and professionally. I'm so pleased and excited to spend the next hour with Christopher Germer, Dr. Germer. I've had the opportunity to take workshops and trainings with Chris, including a current program that he and Kristen Neff and others created for therapists called Self-Compassion in Psychotherapy. Christopher Germer is a clinical psychologist and lecturer on psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He co-developed the Mindful Self-Compassion program with Kristen Neff in 2010, and they've wrote two books, the Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook and Teaching the Mindful Self-Compassion Program. Mindful self-compassion has been taught to over 200,000 people worldwide. And Dr. Germer is the author of The Mindful Path to Self-Compassion. He co-edited two influential volumes on therapy, Mindfulness in Psychotherapy, and Wisdom and Compassion in Psychotherapy. He maintains a small psychotherapy practice in Massachusetts. And so we are so excited to have a dialogue today with Chris about self-compassion, shame, and working with the challenges that so many of us are facing right now. We're going to have time for questions at the end, so please put them in chat and we'll spend some time discussing them when we come to the conclusion. So without further ado, I want to greet Christopher and thank you so much for coming today, Chris.
Thank you, Tracy. It's just great to be here.
Yeah, so this bigger question of self-compassion, I think many of us have heard about it. We're seeing it as a popular modality, but maybe you can share with us your definition of it and a little bit of how you got interested in self-compassion as a psychologist.
Self-compassion essentially is treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding as we would treat a good friend when things go wrong in our lives, when we suffer, when we fail, when we feel inadequate. Because most of us actually are pretty harsh with ourselves when things go wrong. So to be able to be kind to ourselves when things go wrong has enormous impact on the quality of our life. I became interested in self-compassion through two doorways, through the doorway of mindfulness, because I've been meditating for many years, but I also found that the way I was practicing mindfulness at the time and meditation really wasn't as helpful as it could be to work with really difficult and challenging emotions, such as one finds in psychotherapy, but in particular in my own life, even though I was a so-called expert in anxiety disorders for 20 years, I suffered from, debilitating public speaking anxiety. I could never be having this conversation with you back then. And until I learned self-compassion, in other words, in addition to mindfulness is a kind of loving awareness of our moment-to-moment experience, a kind of tender, allowing attitude toward what comes up within us. But sometimes when emotions are really tough, grief, rage, fear, shame, we can't do that. So we actually first need to have a kind of loving, tender awareness of ourselves, in the same way we might comfort somebody else who's struggling, we can comfort ourselves. And that allows us to calm down and actually be with our experience in a more wholehearted way. And so I learned that, frankly, through my struggles with public speaking anxiety, and it changed my life. And after that, I met Kristen Neff, and the rest is history.
So I've noticed in my own practice as a psychologist, it's hard to get people to buy into self-compassion, that there's still these perceptions that it's letting themselves off too easy, it's self-indulgent. How do you get your clients and others to buy into the importance of self-compassion?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the word itself makes people cringe often, because
Yeah.
Self makes people think of selfishness. In other words, if I
Yeah.
practice self-compassion, I'm going to become more selfish. And compassion, people often think about as weak,
Right.
but we know compassion can also be fierce and strong, right? Think Martin Luther King, right? But yeah, as you said, that's really not the case with self-compassion. So how do people start to value this inner resource, which is really essential for a fulfilling life, actually? Is I think at least twofold. Number one is take a look at the research. There are now over 4,000 articles in the academic literature on self-compassion, and pretty much across the board, it shows how good it is for emotional well-being, how it reduces distress, anxiety, depression, and so forth. So it's good for you if you look at the research, but mostly, frankly, when people experience self-compassion, when they actually practice self-compassion, they discover not only what a relief it is, like, why didn't I learn this before? And they also discover over time that it really enhances the quality of their life. So I think it's really a combination of, having enough evidence to practice, and then once a person practices, to actually say, hey, this isn't so bad,
Yeah. Yeah. Why didn't we learn this before? I mean, it's a good question, right? Like, why is it so antithetical to, even in psychology, like how we typically work with clients? I mean, what are your thoughts? Like, why is this new-ish in terms of how we're working with our clients?
Yeah. Well, I think most cultures have a bias against including ourselves in the circle of compassion. Usually we are told we should, think less about ourselves and more about others. And so when we, do a little U-turn and include ourselves in the circle of compassion, we don't get a lot of encouragement at a cultural level, But the other thing is that self-compassion, I don't think is instinctive when we're under stress, when we suffer, when we fail, or we feel inadequate. In other words, I think our physiology actually works against us, because when things go wrong in our lives, we get into a threat state, the physiology of threat, which is, enhanced adrenaline and cortisol. And this is a really quick reaction. And so in a threat state, we go into fight, flight, or freeze. But if we don't have anything to fight against, we instinctively turn it against ourselves and become self-critical. We isolate ourselves. We get stuck in our heads and rumination. This is the opposite of self-compassion. Self-compassion actually has a different physiology. It's a physiology of care. And that is more dependent on, for example, on the hormones, oxytocin and the endorphins. So I think human physiology, when things go wrong, just doesn't even allow us to be kind to ourselves. However, the good news is everybody can learn self-compassion. We can actually activate a care state when we need it the most. Lord knows, when things go wrong in our lives, there's nothing we want more than for somebody to pop into our lives and speak to us in a kind and understanding way, perhaps give us a hug, reassure us. However, that's not very reliable. There's often not the people around that we need. So the good news is we can actually do this for ourselves. And the research also shows that the more we practice, the more we experience the benefits. So it's doable, but it's a bit of an upstream swim because of the nature of our physiology, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it is hopeful in a way, because then it's not that there's something wrong with us that we don't naturally have self-compassion. We actually have to learn it. It is a skill. And we all are capable of doing that. So I think that's a helpful way, versus there's something inherently, I'm not capable of doing it. So I think that's that's a helpful way to look at it. I know you've talked a lot about shame, and I think that's one of the barriers, right, to like this natural feeling of self-compassion. As we feel stress, we blame ourselves, so can you tell us a little bit about, I know you're doing a lot of research on shame, but how does that relate to the difficulty with self-compassion and maybe the U-turn back to bringing self-compassion in?
Yeah. So shame is really the opposite of self-compassion. Um, some of those qualities I mentioned that occur when we're under stress, namely self-criticism, self-isolation, and rumination, are really sort of hallmarks of shame. When we're ashamed, we attack ourselves, we hide, we go small, we go silent, we go away. And we also ruminate, like, why me? What's the matter with me? We become kind of a small ball, when we're ashamed. So, theoretically, shame is the opposite of self-compassion, but also in a moment of shame, we feel so bad about ourselves, the undeserving of kindness, that the last thing we allow into our lives is what we need the most.
Yeah.
And which is some compassion, from somebody else. Even when we're feeling ashamed, we can't accept kindness very readily from others. How much more difficult is it to generate that state of mind within ourselves? So yeah, shame is definitely an obstacle to self-compassion, but self-compassion is also, I would say, the perfect antidote to shame. When we have the capacity to step back and say, oh, this is a moment of shame. In other words, to disentangle from it, make a little space between us and the experience of shame. Then there's the possibility of a new response. In other words, rather than beating up on ourselves, to be kind to ourselves. And when we are, the consequences are much, much different.
So it sounds like the moment of shame and noticing it, naming it, not blaming, that recognition and maybe kindness, like hand on the heart, like, oh, this is shame. There's something about that can begin this more self-compassionate view. So you have to pause and be able to notice it first.
And one thing that allows us to notice it is also to be aware that shame is a universal human emotion.
Yeah.
And one of the qualities of shame is to, hide or attack or basically make ourselves unavailable. So if we have the capacity to say, yes, this is shame, but then have the additional capacity to say, and shame is a part of living, and that even though right now in the midst of shame, I feel terribly alone, I'm actually not alone. Other people know exactly what this is like. And so the sense of common humanity actually allows us to be with shame in a more open-hearted way, open eyes, open heart. And that combination of both kind of mindful awareness of shame plus a sense of common humanity then really enables us to be kind to ourselves. It kind of opens the door. Yeah.
For some people, their inner critic, that part of them, is so fierce and so harsh and unremitting that sometimes it's hard for them to pause or even notice, because it's so familiar. Like in fact, there are often no gaps between feeling okay and feeling shame. So for those folks, again, where might you start, because it's such a present, ongoing, unremitting way of being?
Yeah. So So awareness of self-criticism is just like awareness of shame. It does give us just a little perspective and space to choose a different response. In other words, to acknowledge self-criticism, maybe even acknowledge that self-criticism tends to have a kind of a safety aspect. The whole reason we beat up on ourselves is because we think it's going to protect us from harm or lead to some good. But basically the challenge then is there not perhaps a better way of achieving our goals than beating up on ourselves? And the answer is a resounding yes. There is. But when we beat up on ourselves and we don't feel deserving of compassion, we can still access compassion by activating our natural kindness for others. So to say, to ask the quintessential question, which is, how would I treat a friend who is self-compassion question? How would I treat a friend who would be in exactly the same situation as I? What would I say? What would my attitude be? What would I do? To think like that tends to activate, in other words, thinking about a friend tends to activate this quality of care and kindness, this new physiology. And then we can offer the same to ourselves because we've actually already shifted our mindset. We've shifted our physiology. So when you asked earlier, what does self-compassion mean? What's the definition? And I said, treating ourselves as we might treat a good friend who's struggling. That is also, you might say, a heuristic or even a guide for how to be kind and compassionate with ourselves when we suffer. How would I treat a friend? And then doing that for ourselves.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And that I think is more accessible to people, especially if they really struggle with such deep, inner critic dialogue happening. Yeah.
First, we need to warm up the inner conversation, by connecting with how we might treat someone else. And then we sneak ourselves in,
I like the back door.
Like slip ourselves in, kind of warm up the bed and then slip in kind of thing.
I mean, that's working with our physiology, right? Like kind of, so it doesn't really matter how we warm up the bed, but but we're getting it warm so that we can turn toward ourselves with more kindness. Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. You said in the beginning about fierce self-compassion, which is kind of the not the opposite of maybe the opposite of tender, but this idea that it's multifaceted. Self-compassion isn't just soft and quiet. And maybe you can speak a little bit about that fierce part and how that may be helpful for people as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really important expanded understanding of compassion and self-compassion. And I like to make a shout out to Kristen Neff, who just published a book called Fierce Self-Compassion. So she's really been carrying that torch. And her feeling, incidentally, is that, women have been socialized more than men to kind of suppress their fierce side, not to be angry and so forth. And her point is that, there's so much in life that needs to be changed. There's so much inequity and unfairness in life. And when we see it, we shouldn't be shy about standing up to it out of compassion, compassion for ourselves, compassion for others. We have to make this a more just and equitable world. So how do we do that? Well, the compassion is a enormously powerful resource, not only for, inner health and well-being, but also for, cultural health and well-being. And there are two sides to compassion and self-compassion. One side is kind of a yin side or a tender side, which refers to kind of being with another person or ourselves, and which is often understood kind of as comforting, emotionally comforting, physically soothing, or maybe validating, understanding. So to have these qualities are kind of yin qualities or tender qualities of compassion. But compassion is also fierce. Compassion is also tough. Compassion is also necessary to step out into the world in a wise and useful way. And so qualities of fierce compassion include the ability to say no, to protect. Basically, the foundation of compassion is non-harm. And when somebody is harming your child, just like a mama bear, you're going to growl, you're going to make it very clear. The response is no. And the same with ourselves. If somebody is, violating our boundaries in some way or our health and well-being, we have to be able to say no. We can't be shy about this. So that's a protection aspect of compassion. Then there's also a providing aspect, which is basically to say yes to our needs and also to the legitimate needs of others. Yes. And then also there's a motivating aspect, because you mentioned earlier, Tracey, this myth of self-indulgence, but people who are compassionate, actually, they don't just do what's easy, they do what's beneficial. And that is often difficult, often we have to do difficult things, tough things. So how do we motivate ourselves to do something that is fundamentally good, but might be challenging? And the answer is we do it with kindness and encouragement. We motivate ourselves with kindness and encouragement rather than criticism. In other words, you can do it. I believe in you. I trust you. I'm here for you. That quality of inner dialogue is, you might say, the motivational side of young or fierce compassion, action in the world. But what's especially interesting is that there's really these qualities are complementary, like yin and yang. Actually, to be able to step into the world in a courageous way, we really need to, know what we believe, and we need to have, validate our experience, and we need to have confidence, which comes from the yin side, being with ourselves in a understanding way. And then we can step out in the world. But sometimes we need to actually start with the yang side. We need to say no. We need to make a fence around our garden sometimes so that we can actually ask ourselves, what do I need? What do I believe in? What matters? And then care for ourselves, So sometimes we start with yin in order to have yang. Sometimes we start with yang in order to have yin. And together, we really have a pretty comprehensive and useful resource at our disposal, compassion.
Yeah. Well, you brought up needs, which what do I need and what are my needs? And I find that's a big struggle for many people. Just like self-compassion, people don't feel like they're entitled or their needs. Sometimes, I'll have clients, they'll laugh, they'll say my needs, like almost like how absurd that you're asking me about my needs. Mm-hmm. Yet in order to be able to act in the world or to have more self-compassion, we actually need to sense into our needs. So I wondered if you'd speak a little bit about how do you know what you need and what helps to orient you in that direction? What gets the bedworm to be able to activate these practices?
Yeah. Well, you're so right. Particularly when we're upset, it's super hard to answer the question, what do I need? We're just, confused. But when somebody asks us the question, we do feel it as a inherently compassionate question. And we usually are grateful when somebody asks us, what do I need? So just asking the question is really an expression of self-compassion in and of itself, even if we don't have an answer. Whether we ask ourselves or we ask somebody else. But if we don't have the immediate answer, what's really useful to do is to become a little more specific, to break it down. So not to just have kind of a blank canvas that you have to start drawing on, but asking, if you're feeling frightened, then you can ask the question, what do I need to feel safe?
Mm.
Or what do I need to protect myself? Or if you're feeling confused, you can say, what do I need to, validate myself? Or if you're feeling, physically upset, what do I need to calm myself?
Mhm.
So actually that allows us to answer the question by seeing if we can narrow it down a little, and then, so that's one thing to ask the question. It's another thing to have an answer, but then the most important thing is to do it.
Yeah.
We want to actually manifest compassionate behavior in our lives.
Yeah. And sometimes it is going slow. I feel like that also is where we get jammed up because we decide we need to do something. I don't know, let's say we need to start meditating, right? And then we set these really difficult goals. We're going to sit for 45 minutes every day. We don't do it. We feel shame. And then the cycle starts over again. So sometimes like you said, if we don't actually act it out, it can cause, more doubt and more self-criticism.
Yeah.
Yeah. So setting goals, I guess, that are manageable. I think that's part of the compassion, right? The fierce compassion is like setting goals, but also setting them so they're realistic, so that there's momentum moving forward rather than more criticism.
Yeah, I would agree. People tend to be really interested in self-compassion at New Year's, because suddenly there's a proliferation of resolutions, which tend to all disappear. Like how many of us, like now, remember our resolutions from January 1st? It's like, oh, right. I totally forgot about that. So, apropos kind of, what does it take to actually make positive changes in our lives? We really need, I think, to start with self-compassion. In other words, when you were talking about making realistic goals, that's compassionate. There's nothing compassionate about making unrealistic goals, right?
True.
But what it enables us to make realistic goals is actually a heart quality, which is, honey, you don't need to, try to become somebody or something radically different than who you are. You already are good enough. And I appreciate and respect that you would like to improve in some ways, but let's take it slow, on the foundation of loving ourselves, of your goodness. Nobody's perfect. We're all human, and we're just, we're doing this together. Let's be realistic. You get it? So there's like a loving heart quality that needs to be at the foundation of any sort of self-improvement effort. And out of that kindness comes a kind of clearer vision about what actually we care about in life. In other words, so many people want to lose weight, but is that actually what we care about? No, probably what we care more about is health. And probably what we care more about is feeling good about ourselves as human beings. And so, so based on those core values, health and self-respect, what do I want to do? So it puts this whole self-compassion, puts the whole self-improvement agenda on a realistic and frankly on a deeper foundation, and as a result, a more successful foundation.
Yeah, I felt like you were speaking to me. I was like, oh, that's so nice. I guess I get it. It's sometimes hearing it from another person gives you the languaging. That was really beautiful description of how we could talk to ourselves. So self-compassion, we're talking about like our own work. How about in other places, like the workplace, for example? How could self-compassion help with so much strife in employee settings and so much stress with people, especially the last few years? Do you see it playing a role in terms of employee relationships and supervisor-employee interactions?
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of good research coming out now on compassionate organizations. For example, Jane Dutton at the University of Michigan has dedicated her life to the scientific study of compassion in organizations, and Monica Warline as well. And they wrote a book called Compassion at Work, which is really quite good. And it basically disabuses people of the notion that if compassion is a central value at the workplace, it actually doesn't decrease productivity. It increases productivity. It increases retention. It increases creativity. It increases teamwork. It's just a really, really good thing to have a more compassionate workplace. But then the question is, how does one have a more compassionate workplace? Well, it's important, first of all, that people in a position of leadership share these values, but also whenever you ask somebody, would you like to be more compassionate or learn or practice how to be more compassionate? Not too many people say yes. Mostly they say, to be quite honest, I'm already too compassionate and it's like not a good thing for me. I need to toughen up, So the idea of, being more compassionate at the workplace doesn't work. But your question was basically, so what about self-compassion at the workplace? And the answer, and this is just a prelude to saying that the easiest way to be more compassionate toward others at the workplace is to actually be more self-compassionate. If we want to create a compassionate workplace, there need to be systemic changes, but also individual changes, particularly by leaders. And the easiest way to be more compassionate is to be self-compassionate. And the reason I say this is because when we're suffering, and since we spend so much time at work, we actually suffer a lot at work. All of us suffers at work. Usually in the workplace, we pretend that this is not a place where our suffering matters, but it does. And we're seeing now with the Great Resignation that actually this is a long delayed recognition of how people's lives were filled with struggle, So the assumption is we want more compassionate workplaces. The assumption is that suffering happens. What is the best way? What is the resource to work with this kind of suffering at the workplace? And self-compassion is the easiest way to respond to suffering in a way that it transforms it and also leads to compassion for others. So in a sense, when we're struggling, to be able to say to ourselves, oh, this really hurts. I'm in pain, right? Maybe nobody's going to say this to you. And then your reaction is certainly not going to be compassionate if it's not validated. But when you can validate your own struggle, when you can see that you're not the only person in the world who ever, botched a presentation or lost a promotion or whatever it may be, when we can see our common humanity and then be kind to ourselves, we actually change our inner life. And out of that usually comes something radically different than if we are stressed out and buried in shame. So the thing that emerges out of it is often a kind of a quality of warmth, curiosity, some humility, not submissiveness, but some humility, as well as a wish to improve. All these are natural fruits of self-compassion. And then it's so easy to engage meaningfully at the workplace. And frankly, it makes it easier for others to engage with us. So my recommendation is, because work is full of suffering, just as life is, let's carry self-compassion into the workplace and see what happens.
I love it. It does require a bit of vulnerability, which is hard in the workplace because it can feel like that's the last place you want to do that. And yet the fruits of that, like you said, these natural occurring qualities of warmth, improvement, looking at the bigger picture, greater good, I mean, they come from that. So some people have to take a risk, I guess, right? And be willing to.
Well, but nobody has to know that you're being self-compassionate. In other words, literally, you can do this in 10 seconds as you're walking down the hall, or you can take an extra 5 minutes in the bathroom or something. And it's not like you have to broadcast what's going on inside. This U-turn, this turn of heart, this moment of just recognizing what you're experiencing in the present moment and being kind to yourself, understanding that it's, goes with the territory, being kind to ourselves, nobody has to know about, and so the vulnerability is we're just being vulnerable in our own hearts. But this whole time we can do the fierce compassion thing, which is not now, give me 5 minutes,
Yeah, so you'd be doing both at the same time in a way. Yeah.
For sure. You can create a fence around your garden as you recover. But the harder work is actually to tend to our heart with compassion. It's not that it's only going to have a good outcome.
So it sounds like you're saying starting with self-compassion, because the fruits of that are going to come out without even anyone knowing necessarily, but something has shifted inside of you, which then impact the people you're interacting with. And that's one place to start. For sure. Yes. Yeah. Well, I know you and I had talked about maybe doing a practice in U-turn it would be super interesting, I think, for us to practice if that feels okay with you to do that now. Sure. Yeah. So there's an exercise which taps this quality of self-kindness that I'm going to lead now, kind of as a little bit of a meditation, kind of a reflective meditation. But in daily life, you can also practice this on the spot, and you don't need to do the whole piece, the whole thing that we're doing now. You can just take a little piece of it. But it's based on what are known as the 3 universal expressions of compassion. So there's a scientist at Berkeley, Dr. Keltner, who did some cross-cultural research, and he found that wherever we go, we are able to identify compassion through a soft gaze, through soothing touch, and through gentle vocalizations. And so this is what we do for others, or others do for us when we're being compassionate. But we can do this U-turn. We can actually do this for ourselves. So what I'm going to do, if you're interested in participating, folks who are listening, is just to lead this exercise in which we experience a soft gaze, soothing touch, and gentle vocalizations for ourselves. Okay, so just take about 8 minutes, and or more or less. But if you would like to participate, please find a comfortable position wherever you are right now. And you can allow your eyes to close partially or fully. And I'd like you, just for the sake of this exercise, to connect with a problem that exists in your life right now. So maybe it's a work problem, or maybe it's a health problem, or a relationship problem. But just
reminding ourselves of some discomfort or stress that we're experiencing. This is as a good reason for self-compassion. Usually in life, we don't need to look for it. It comes right to our door. But for this exercise, please think of a situation, a problem, and also please make sure that it's a mild to moderate problem, not a intense or severe one, particularly now because this is like the beginning of self-compassion practice for most folks. And when you have that situation in mind, please just drop into your body and just notice how it feels right now in your body. In other words, you're probably feeling a little bit of stress. In particular, notice where in your body you might feel the distress the most. Maybe it's your, jaw, or your throat, or your chest, or your belly. And so the first part, soothing touch, I'd like you to take a hand, if it feels right to you, and just place it on that part of your body where you feel tension or stress. And this is simply an expression of kindness. We're not trying to make the feeling go away. It is part of the human experience. But just feeling the sense of touch of your hand, gentle pressure, maybe the warmth of your hand. And if you like, even allowing, kind of imagining kindness flowing through your fingers into this part of your body that actually holds tension for you, stress for you. Your body is working hard for you. So by putting your hand there, sending a little kindness or warmth, you're acknowledging the hard work of your body. And you can leave your hand there if you like, or place it elsewhere. And I'd now like you to also to bring to mind a living being who you experience as very compassionate, even compassionate toward you. So it could be your dog, maybe there's a way that your dog looks at you at times, or it could be a child, or it could be a partner or a parent or grandparent, or it could even be, a spiritual figure whom you haven't met personally, but in the flesh, but whose gaze you perceive as compassionate. So please bring to mind some compassionate being. And in your mind's eye, just just allow yourself to see the face, in particular the eyes of this being. Looking at you in a loving and compassionate way, just gazing at you in your direction. And allowing yourself right now to bathe in that gaze, with nothing to do but simply be the recipient, to bathe in this kind person's gaze. So that's soothing touch with a soft gaze. And now I'd like you to imagine that either this living being, if this living being has words, or imagine that some other person were right now to whisper into your ear words that you need to hear in your life right now, perhaps because of this problem itself. So if someone were to say something to you right now and your response would be, oh, thank you, I needed that, thank you for saying that. What would those words be? What words would you hear right now? And now see if you can actually repeat those words for yourself. If you can allow those very words to roll through your mind, maybe even enter into your heart. See if you can receive those words. If you can allow your being to be nourished by those words. Okay, so finally, before we close, bringing it all together, feeling right now, the sense of touch on your body, seeing the face or the eyes of some being, gazing lovingly at you and allowing yourself to bathe in that gaze. And also allowing words of kindness to resonate throughout your being right now. Okay, and now please release this practice. Just let it go, but keep your eyes closed just for a moment. And just notice how you feel inside your body. After having received a soft gaze, soothing touch, gentle vocalizations. How does it feel inside your body? So this is the power of self-kindness. And seeing if you can allow your experience to be just as it was. Maybe there was some resistance, maybe it just flowed like water over a dam, doesn't matter. Allowing your experience to have been just as it was and allowing yourself right now, if only for one moment, to be just as you are, just like this. Okay, and then when you're ready to slowly open your eyes.
That I love your warming quality. You know, that has that warming up quality, that practice. Yeah.
You could feel a sense of warmth coming up?
I could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was there any particular part of it that you felt was more warming than another?
The key was the going from the external voice of kindness to internalizing it. That moment, something released.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So I know we have some questions, so I thought maybe we'll turn to our Q&A now. Some folks have written some things in. Lobi wrote, I found that unrelenting shame and self-abuse is most difficult to interrupt when it's an intergenerational dialogue. Dr. Germer, do you have any insights into helping people break this ever-endless hold?
Yes. Yeah, so there's a lot of attention now to intergenerational shame in the field of psychology. And it really, necessitates a systemic vision. We need to be able to see how trauma and shame is transferred from one generation to another. But most importantly, we need actually to be able to register it in our bodies if we can, because it's actually transferred not just in messages, but in a physical sense of holding on and fear. And so we learn that through the generations, and we are carrying that in our bodies, in our physical bodies, or if you have a sense of energy in our energy bodies. So the way to as it were break the chain for many people, and this pertains not just to intergenerational shame and trauma, but to any, frankly, difficult emotions, is to find that experience in the body somehow, and then relate to the body in a new way, in a compassionate way, not unlike we did just now with the soothing touch, but even to go deeper than that. There's a wonderful therapeutic system that's becoming quite popular now called internal family systems. Richard Schwartz wrote a book called No Bad Parts. So when we find a place in our body that has been holding on, and we might have really just inherited that at birth, that part of our body also has something to say, as if it were a person, And so we can also listen to that part of our body, and we can also respond with compassion to that part of our body. So that whole quality of listening and responding even deepens the process of liberating ourselves from inherited trauma. So that's a lot of work, what I just said, and it's the kind of thing you really probably want to do with somebody else because of the enormity of it. So much bigger than us, it's systemic. But I'm just saying this as a way of maybe pointing a direction. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I love bringing in the IFS part around the burden, especially this intergenerational trauma, to be able to even touch into what that is, what we're holding. Yeah. But I agree about working with someone can help give you so much more support. Another question Mariah asks, don't we also want to, quote, be better so that others can approve of us? I feel like so much of our self-criticism has to do with the rules society has created on how we should be or how we should look like.
Oh, spot on. Yes, exactly. And that clear awareness is the first step toward liberation,
Yeah.
So there are really two sources of self-worth, we can say. One source is through approval, what psychologists call contingent social support. Contingent means I only feel as good as other people treat me. And that's a very unstable form of self-worth. And with social media, it's probably become even more intense as more and more of our moments and more of our self-esteem is tied up in technology. So our self-esteem is unstable. It's a roller coaster if it depends on external validation. But there's another source of self-esteem, and that is internal kindness. And that is much more stable because it's portable, because we carry it around. So one thing that the research is very clear about is that self-compassion actually enhances our self-worth. But what's noteworthy is that it's a very different source. Internal kindness rather than external approval. And so in order to liberate us from these, boxes or categories or expectations that make us valuable according to our culture, and the capitalist culture doesn't help because it assumes deficiency, and then if you buy this, you'll be better. What liberates us from that is really turning our attention inward and learning to see ourselves, to love ourselves, to validate ourselves, and ultimately to develop confidence in who we are. And you know what? The world generally responds pretty well to that because it's so unique and wonderful.
Yeah, I love that portability and stability that you're talking about, because it's a moving target. Society, rules in and rules out all these things, and we're constantly trying to measure up. But you're right, like coming from that stable place of this is what matters.
Yeah, we have to get off the roller coaster,
Yeah. A couple other questions. Someone wrote, I have a fear of the unknown and taking chances with fear that I will make a mistake. I don't know why. I'm not sure how to get out of that rut. So fear of the unknown and taking chances about and not wanting to make a mistake.
Yeah, fear of unknown, taking chances, risks, and basically fear of failure,
Yeah.
I presume. And so, everyone, we have to fail in order to learn, right? And actually at the workplace, it's especially in Silicon Valley, they've really come to understand that failure is key for advancement, but when it happens to us, we're not particularly keen on it, in the moment. I can tell you, my wife is a scientist, and you really can't learn in science unless you find yourself in dead ends over and over again. And it requires so much, personal resilience to be a scientist, or frankly, to do anything that hasn't been done before. Right. So I just want to say that failure is a necessary part of life. But the question was, I personally don't take failure very well. And the reason is because we don't think, we try to avoid failure and not take risks because we don't think we can cope with it. In other words, if I failed, it's going to ruin my day. It's going to ruin my week. I'm not going to be a very good person to be around. Therefore, I shouldn't do it. But so there's a kind of a sense that maybe I'm not resilient enough, that I can't bounce back enough, that I won't be able to cope. However, this is the interesting thing. When we cultivate self-compassion, we actually feel like there's a person around us that is going to hold us and buoy us up no matter what happens, So, I was talking earlier about my public speaking anxiety. What enables me to speak in public now is because if I flub it, I don't feel like I'm going to spend an inordinate amount of time beating up on myself, because there's a new voice in my head which says, you know what, Chris, that didn't work so well. Maybe the next time is going to work better. You gave it your best. Good for you. And, it's not the end of the world. This tone of kindness, this tone of I love you, this tone of internal support is what gives us the courage and the bravery to step into the world, do the best we can, fail, dust ourselves off, and carry on.
I love that. Yeah. And I like that idea of failure being part of the process, like just normalizing the playing field and just saying, of course we are. Yeah, that's such a kind way of saying it to ourselves. Well, Chris, we're coming.
And we can get better at it. We can get better at coping with failure. Yeah.
Through the practices, through
practicing self-kindness.
Yeah. Well, I love even hearing how you changed your own internal dialogue about public speaking. You could hear the practice, the years of practice of that self-kindness back. Oh, next time it'll be better. I mean, you can hear how that over time has shifted for you. Well, we're coming to the end. I'm so appreciative. I think you gave us so many things to think about, and really, again, this warmth and this common humanity piece that you share in all your work. I'm so deeply grateful. And for Studio B and all of you that participated today, I'm so glad that you jumped on this call. And each person, when we do our own work, it it impacts the next person and the next person. So again, a deep bow to you, Chris, for all that you're doing for us and the world. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Tracey. I
All
really
right.
appreciate it.
All right. So on behalf of Studio B, thank you so much for coming today, and have a good rest of the week. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.